Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast has evolved over the 5+ years since it first launched. From now on, I'm going to be talking about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. And also mindset, of course, but mindset of all kinds, not just business mindset. I think. Things are changing for me, as you may have noticed if you've been following me online or listening to this podcast, so anything goes here. I hope you stay along for the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today, and now let's get into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 331. This is your host, Holly Worton, and I'm back with another solo episode. This episode is inspired by a question from a patron. She says, yesterday I had a re-listen to your podcast episode with Cara about connecting with nature. At one point, Cara suggested that people might be missing out on connecting with the land because of fear of what others might think of them. And you talked about people being surprised to hear that you walk alone, as that can seem frightening to people. It got me to thinking again about the fears which tend to prevent us prioritizing and making the most of what we have access to in life, and how to quiet down unhelpful distractions. And I wondered if you had any thoughts or suggestions on this theme. Many thanks. So, this is a very timely question because I just started thinking recently about this book that I read a couple of years ago that was really, really useful, which is called The Gift of Fear. It's by Gavin de Becker, and it's called The Gift of Fear, Survival Signals That Protect Us from Violence. So, this is a book that I read a few years ago, and I found it really, really useful. And then someone mentioned it online and said that they reread the book every year because they found it really helpful. And I thought, oh, it's been a while since I read it, so I should pick it up again. So I've picked it up again, and I've just started to read it. But I think the important thing to highlight here is that there are two basic kinds of fears. There are fears which are helpful, and there are fears which are not helpful. So the kinds of fear that Gavin de Becker talks about in his book are useful fears, helpful fears, fears that will keep us safe. So that author, and I will link to this in the show notes, he is someone who has helped celebrities with stalkers, other people with stalkers. He's talked a lot about domestic violence and ways to prevent violent attacks. And he basically teaches you in this book, he shares a series of situations and then points out the ways that the victim in each situation saw little details that told them that something bad was coming or that the person that they're engaging with was not a safe person. Red flags, basically, and how they ignored them despite the fact that there were several red flags. And so he shares in this book what he calls PINs, which are pre-incident indicators. So they're indicators or red flags that something bad might happen in terms of an engagement or kind of an interaction with another person. And this is a really useful book, and it really teaches you about the gift of fear and how to pay attention to your intuition and use your intuition to let you know when a situation is potentially unsafe. So that book is a really good book to learn about the useful, the helpful kind of fear. When you're walking alone in the woods, or when I'm walking alone in the woods, I am very aware of the fact that I am walking alone in the woods. I never wear headphones when I'm out in nature. Partly because that kind of defeats part of the purpose of being in nature, but also because it removes one very important sense. I don't tend to walk around like looking behind me, checking my back. I just walk. So I pay attention to what I'm hearing around me. And I pay attention to the people that I pass. So sometimes I'm out in the woods and I'm completely alone. And sometimes I'm out in the woods and I cross paths with other people. You see all kinds of dog walkers, you might see cyclists, and, some people just out for a walk on their own. And it's something I do unconsciously, but I definitely tune into kind of the energy that I get from the person. And I pay attention to anything weird or unusual about the person. This one time I was walking through the woods and I was kind of on this trail that was very near the edge of the woods. And I saw this man walk up this hill and then come out onto this trail that I was on. And he was wearing a suit and tie. And I just thought that was really, really weird. Because you don't usually go for a walk in the woods with a suit and tie. There was a place where he could have parked, but it was a few minutes walking distance away. It was just a really weird situation. And so to me, that was like a red flag. And I kind of made note of it and kept on with my thing. But I was aware of the fact that there was an unusual person in the midst. There have been times when I've crossed paths with someone that just had weird energy, or again, was dressed inappropriately for being out on a walk in nature, or, that kind of thing. Nothing's ever happened to me, but anytime I see something that's kind of off, it's a red flag and I pay attention to it. And I might look behind my back just to make sure that the other person has kind of continued on the trail and kept on going. Again, nothing's ever happened to me. I've never had a situation where I felt like I needed to run or I was really unsafe, but I've had these weird little red flag moments where it just kind of flags up my awareness. And again, I stay aware when I'm out in nature. Yes, there are times where I'll sit against a tree and I'll close my eyes and I might meditate, but usually when I'm walking, I've got my eyes and ears open. So that's the practical side of fear. I would not walk through the woods with headphones. I just, probably nothing's going to happen, but I just don't. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, I just don't. I wouldn't risk my safety in that way because things do happen. So again, that's the practical side of fear. Stay safe. Use common sense. And if you don't have common sense, or if you're not new to doing stuff like this, go online and search how to stay safe as a woman alone in the woods or a person alone in the woods. And Google it and see what other people recommend. Other things that I have done to be safe when I'm alone in the woods is I've done a lot of navigation classes. I know how to read a map. I know how to read contours. I know how to navigate. I always carry a paper map and I always have the OS Maps app on my phone and I know where I am. So, that's another practical side of being safe when you're out in nature. But that's just one example. Life involves all kinds of situations, safe and unsafe. And this gift of fear, this inner sense of knowing if something is unsafe, that our awareness of those red flags can really, really help us. So when I was putting together the bullet points for this episode, I thought about what are some of my fears and what are some fears that I've had in the past and what are some fears that other people have. And so I Googled top fears, and some of them are fears that I've had and some of them are fears that I haven't. Let's take a look at how these fears can be helpful and unhelpful. So the top fear, or one of the top fears on most of the list, was public speaking. I used to be terrified of public speaking. That's a pretty unhelpful fear. I mean, usually we get into situations of public speaking because we have sought them out. Very rarely will you just be out and about in life and someone calls upon you to deliver a speech. So if public speaking is something you'd like to do, if public speaking is something that would be useful to your business, your career, it's a good idea to get over that because that's not a helpful fear. And the way I did that was by joining Toastmasters. And I've talked about Toastmasters a lot. I wasn't a member for a very long time. I didn't even do all of my 10 speeches, but I learned so much and it helped me get over my fear of public speaking. So if that's your fear, I would consider that to be an unhelpful fear. Again, if you're not interested in speaking professionally or publicly or in a presentation at work, maybe it's not a problem for you. It's an easy fear, I think, to get over because you have tools out there like Toastmasters, which are really supportive environments to help you get over those fears. And I find that when I get over one fear, like public speaking, it's like my comfort zone gets stretched in other areas as well. It's not like I overcome that fear, but it helps me with other fears. It has like a ripple effect. So another fear that I used to have that I don't have anymore is a fear of water, like swimming in water. And this was also an unhelpful fear because years ago I used to swim for exercise. When I was in grad school at UCLA, I used to swim every morning for exercise in the morning before class. And I know how to swim. I've known how to swim since I was a kid. Granted, I learned how to swim kind of late, but I was still, 9 or so when I learned how to swim. But I would be in the pool, have my goggles on, I'd swim, get to that point where it would kind of drop off to the deep end. And because I was wearing goggles, I could see the floor of the pool. And it was like my heart would just start like pounding. And I'd swim really fast to get to the end, and I'd turn around and swim really fast. And then it was like once I got back to the shallow end, I could just kind of relax and swim normally. But that was a problem. I really didn't like that because I really enjoyed swimming. I found it both relaxing and energizing and found it to be really good exercise, but I had this anxiety. So what I did, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that other people do this, but it worked for me, was I took a scuba diving course. I learned how to scuba dive. And I, again, don't necessarily follow my example. I don't think this is necessarily safe. But what I did was I took a diving course at UCLA, which was like a 10-week course, super organized, professional, lots of instructors. It wasn't just one instructor. We were really supported. It was a really comprehensive course. So it worked for me because I felt very supported, held. Now, I never told anyone that I had that fear. In fact, if I had, I think that would have disqualified me from taking the course because it's dangerous, which is why I don't follow my example. But again, it worked for me. Along with water, and I don't know what my fear was. It was that knowing that like the bottom of the pool was further away, just anxiety. And it wasn't necessarily a fear of drowning, which is something else that's on the list of people's top fears. But I don't know, there it was, but it's gone. So drowning, another top fear. That is a useful fear, especially if you don't know how to swim or if you're swimming in like the ocean or rivers or natural situations. But that's an easy fear to overcome. Like take swimming lessons, even if you're an adult and you know how to swim. If you have a fear of drowning, like get help, take lessons and become a better swimmer. And probably having better swimming skills will help you with your fear of drowning because it'll give you confidence on how you behave when you're in the water. A fear of heights, again, that's kind of a helpful and unhelpful fear. I mean, heights can be dangerous. Along with that is flying. Lots of people are afraid of flying. Flying is something that's totally unnatural. We get in this giant metallic thing and fly through the air. It's, kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Like, it makes sense that you would be afraid of it. And yet, it's pretty safe. Probably safer than cars. Actually, I think it is if you look at the statistics. So, if you're the kind of person who needs to fly, or if you have a job that involves heights or something, like this is a fear that's unuseful or unhelpful, and it's something that you might want to work through, whether it's through hypnotherapy or NLP or that kind of thing. It can be really, really crippling to have that kind of anxiety every time you're traveling. Lots of fears I found online around bugs and insects and snakes and dogs, animals, wild animals. That's, kind of a helpful fear. Dogs can be dangerous, so can snakes and bugs and insects. But if it's something that's crippling, it's something that's, again, worth taking care of. Blood and needles. Not so much blood, but needles. I used to have a fear of needles years ago. And the way I got over that was by signing up to give blood. That's a really big needle. And I just would give blood every chance I got. Did that enough times that I got over the fear of needles. I never passed out, thankfully. I always hydrated well before and I ate well before so that physically I was in the best place, and then I would go and give blood. And, I did that enough times that fear of needles went away. Other common fears, claustrophobia. I've never experienced that. I actually really like, not confined spaces, but I like small, cozy spaces. So I don't really relate to that. But it's a very common fear. So if this is unhelpful to you, again, get therapy, get help with it. And not just traditional talk therapy, but something like hypnotherapy that can really help you shift this. Psych K, I'm sure, can help with, well, yes, of course, it can help with phobias. I've done that before. So Psych K can also help with that. I'll make note of this in the show notes. There are all kinds of alternative therapies that can help with fears. Reprogramming your subconscious beliefs. Thunder and lightning. Again, that's something that I think it's a fear that comes from a logical place. Thunder and lightning can be dangerous. If you got struck by lightning, that would not be good. It might kill you. Certainly mess up your day. It could cause damage. It could burn your house down, I guess. But again, if it's an unuseful fear, if it's unhelpful, if it's causing you problems, get help with it. Other fears, fear of strangers. That's another one. Fear of strangers, going back to that Gift of Fear book. If you have a fear of strangers, read that book. That's a really good book, and then get additional help if you need to. But the good thing about that book is it teaches you warning signs, teaches you those pins. Other little fears that I have just in like day-to-day life. I mean, like in kickboxing, whenever I'm sparring with someone new, yeah, I have a little bit of apprehension there because I don't know how the person's going to behave. I don't know, you can look at their belt, but sometimes the belt color doesn't signify like how skilled they actually are. Like last Monday, I was sparring with someone I'd never met before, but the person was an orange belt, but yet clearly much more skilled than that. And I later found out that they had a black belt from another discipline. So I was a bit taken off guard, but I was a bit, apprehensive because I hadn't been in a sparring situation with that guy before. But, there you go. It wasn't that big of a deal. I was on the mat, I did it, and there we go. Other fears I have, new situations sometimes make me feel anxious. And it's not necessarily a fear in the sense that I avoid new situations because I'm always doing stuff. New things that I haven't done before, but I do have a certain amount of apprehension. I've got another Cambo ceremony booked for December, and I'm feeling a little apprehensive about that. I'm really looking forward to it. This is going to be my third one this year, third and final ceremony this year, and I find it really useful. I think it's great healing, but it's a really intense experience, so there is a little bit of fear there, but it's not going to stop me from doing it. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. Like, are these fears stopping you from doing things that you want to do? Or are you just feeling a little apprehensive about these situations? So I think those are all fears that are either totally unhelpful or helpful and unhelpful, because some fears are helpful in certain situations and unhelpful in other situations. But there are other fears that are just unhelpful. Fears like, not being good enough, fears of what will they think of me, stuff that holds us back from doing things, keeps us playing small, and prevents us from doing the things that we want to do. That is when a fear, in my opinion, becomes problematic. Now, I've done several episodes about this over the years, and I'm going to link to these in the show notes, but episode 259, Joe Casey and I talked about what will they think of me, will they like me, and how to get past these fears. Episode 246, Joe Casey and I talked about how to tell if you're out of alignment or deep in fear with your business. Episode 226, I talked about what to do when fear of overwhelm is keeping you stuck in business. Episode 201, 4 woo experts and I talked about how to get over your fear of sharing your woo. Episode 137, I talked about how to stop hiding and overcome your fear of visibility, and I wrote a book about business visibility. Episode 110, I talked about how to overcome your business fears. And episode 67, Anne Brown and I talked about how to overcome fear of not being good enough, which is a classic for me. So these are all fears that stem from limiting beliefs that are really, really not serving us. So in the past, whenever I've talked about mindset stuff, I usually talk about fears, blocks, and limiting beliefs as kind of a package. And it's this package of unhelpful fears and beliefs and mind crap that prevent us from doing the things we want to do in life. So I really see unhelpful fears like this as a mindset issue. They can be unhelpful distractions. They can prevent us from prioritizing the things that we want to do and actually doing the things that we want to do. And, there's a book that I've never actually read it because it just doesn't appeal to me, but it's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And that's something that a lot of people say, just push through it. Just feel the fear and do it anyway. Just make yourself do it. And honestly, that has never worked for me. Like, I just keeps me stuck. And so I've always had to do the mindset work to make it easier for me to take the actions I want to take in life. So I think this is an issue of, treating it the way I treat all other mindset issues. Sit down and make a list of all the things that you are afraid of. Everything. Whether it's, the things that I mentioned earlier, rewind it, because it's on a cassette. Go back earlier to the earlier moment of this recording and review the list of phobias and see if you have any of those. And write those down, and then write down anything and everything else that you are afraid of. And then look at your goals. Look at your plans for next year if you've done that. Look at the things that you want to do with your life, both personal, professional, and look at the fears that come up when you think about doing those things. And write all those fears down. I really think it's important to give space to our fears. Don't dwell on them, but give them space. Give them a page in your journal, write them down, and then look at them. Which of those fears are useful? Which of them are helpful? And which of them are unhelpful? And then what are you going to do about it? Do the mindset work. Get help, whether it's with using something like Psych-K to work with yourself or seeing a facilitator to work with you. And I have a ton of Psych-K professionals, facilitators that I can recommend to you. Hypnotherapy, I have tons of people that do that. If you need a professional who works either online or in person, I am happy to give you recommendations or give you ideas or suggestions or things that have worked for me. But there's a lot of stuff out there that you can either train in to use with yourself or see a professional to help you with this. I really, really, really recommend something like Psych-K because it's something you can train in 3 days in a long weekend. It's not too expensive, and it will save you thousands and thousands of whatever your local currency is in therapy and healing and stuff. I don't think it's the only answer. In fact, it's, one of many things that I work with, but I think it's a really great starting point if you want to train in something that you can use yourself and have as a tool always. I highly, highly recommend it. Again, if you want other recommendations, I'm happy to give those too. But that's really important. Also, as I said, hypnotherapy is really, really good, NLP, at dealing with trauma and fear and phobias, that kind of thing. So that is how I would recommend working with reducing those unhelpful fears. It really is. Fears are part of our mindset. They are an unhelpful part of our mindset. And I think it's really important to, as I said, give them the space that you need and then work through them. But if you just try to sweep them under the rug and pretend that they're not there and repress them, that's not going to be helpful. That's not going to be useful. You really need to just put these out there and don't be ashamed of them. I was just thinking that because I think one of the reasons that we might, or some people might, sweep them under the rug is because we're ashamed of them. Who wants to say they're afraid of, insects or whatever? I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of there. We've all got fears, useful and unuseful, and it's just a matter of doing the work you need to do to work through them and get past them so that you can live the life you want to live and do the things you want to do and not let your fears hold you back. So going back to the beginning question that inspired this whole thing, the episode that I did with Cara about connecting with nature, which I will link to in the show notes. So Cara suggested that people might be missing out on connecting with the land because of fear of what other people might think of them. Again, that is an unhelpful fear. What will they think of me? I've got a whole separate podcast episode on that, which is in the show notes, but treat that as you would any other mindset issue that you want to transform. I talked about people being surprised to hear that I walk alone, as that can be frightening to people. Read The Gift of Fear. I think that is an excellent book. The Kindle book has an extended version or an extended something. I don't remember, but the Kindle has something the paperback doesn't. But buy whatever format you want. It's an excellent book in any format. So that, Gift of Fear. So got me to thinking about the fears which tend to prevent us prioritizing and making the most of what we have access to in life. How to quieten down unhelpful distractions. This is so important. Just identifying the things that we want to be prioritizing, the things we want to be doing. How do we want to make the most of what we have access to in life? Maybe start by that. Start by making a list of all the things that are important to you, all your priorities, all the things you want to do. Create a bucket list if you don't have one. Look at your bucket list if you do have one. And then make that list of all the fears that you have that might get in the way of you achieving these goals, of doing these things, of living your life fully. And then do the mindset work that you need to do to release these fears and to reprogram helpful beliefs that will help you to create the life that you want. Thank you for listening. I hope you have found this interesting and useful. As I said, this question came from one of my patrons, and I would love for you, listener, to join me on Patreon. If you head to patreon.com/Holly Worton, you can join me there. Membership starts at just $1 a month, and you get access to exclusive content and done-for-you mindset work and energy work and stuff that I don't offer anywhere else. So, patreon.com/Holly Worton. I would love to see you there. And please drop me a line. Let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollyworton.com or find me online and get in touch there. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week. Remember to visit hollyworton.com/331 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollyworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.